So, without any further ado, let's go ahead and get this thing going. So, I was asking for a list of different questions about the mod. I was just kind of hoping to, to see what kind of things were confusing for people, what kind of things were relatively unknown and all that sort of thing. So if at any point you have a question, just put it in the old chatty box, as you do. And, alright, let's go through this here. So, right now, over on the Reddit, I'm just going to go down these in any particular order. So, first one that tends to come over quite a bit is just whether or not it's OneVision is a difficulty mod. And while it does in some cases make stuff more difficult, it is not actually meant as a difficulty mod. It's, by and large, it's more of an immersion mod. So essentially the entire game tends to follow its own rules better. One of my favorite examples of this is actually one of Denham's lines in Coda. I guess, well, you have to technically be in Coda to get there, but there's a particular exchange with this kind of witch lady that shows up, that shows essentially how to make Angel Knights, and his first reaction is, oh, you can prevent death and everything else, and you've had Blessing Stones in the store this entire time. You could have just done that at any point, instead of going through like a 6-step process to make Angel Knights. So, a lot of times, the story was excellently written, most of the game really was just excellently done, but there were times, it could use a little more logic, so to speak. So, it's not a difficulty mod, everybody just becomes better at their job. That's the best possible way to put this. Everyone just becomes better at what they do. So, for example, you've got Amazons and warriors here. It says they're a jack of all trades. They actually are a jack of all trades. They now get access to basically every weapon that you can possibly think of, aside from, let's see, they don't get books, whips. Actually, no, I think they do get whips. So they don't get books, they don't get instruments, they don't get guns. Everything else is pretty much fair game for them. So they're like your overall weapon user kind of thing. The only, well, I guess we'll deal with buffs and nerfs later, but like archers, for example, they're entirely a harassment unit now. They used to be kind of just an endless, pretty much anti-tank bow kind of situation. Which it turns out, I only found this out today, but apparently it was just due to odd scaling on how they worked. Because here's the thing, they benefited from everything. So you got like a background thing where certain weapons have just innate bonuses to them. So you got knives, you got bows, you got katanas. They just have like a background bonus at all times. I need to remember to actually put the link to Rakes' little damage chart thing. He actually made this whole formula, like this Excel spreadsheet on how to actually calculate all these different damages based on all kinds of different stuff. So yeah, they got that background bonus, and then you have scaling bonuses based off of different stats, and basically they got the full effect of both strength and dexterity, meaning that essentially they could overpower anything to a degree that is, quite frankly, hilarious. But anyhow, moving on. So, you got, let's say, sorceresses and wizards here. They're basically like a long-range cannon kind of unit. They get stuff like Extend a lot earlier. Meditate is actually a skill that takes a lot more recovery time now, so just kind of a random note to bring up here. Clerics and monks, though. Those are probably the biggest game changer in terms of actual difficulty for the mod. So, essentially, instead of just being squishy healers with no scaling, and I'll get to that scaling thing later, they became essentially more, I would say, kind of like a D&D kind of monk kind of thing. A lot more evasion going on, they've got access to different weapons, and they're just a lot more survivable. Like a single monk more than likely can keep an entire front line afloat, depending on how they do it. So just in general, it's not a difficulty mod, it just follows all the writing's internal logic a lot better. Okay, moving on to the next question here. We have, well, kind of a follow-up to that. What is the difficulty? So the difficulty is nothing like FFT 1.3, which I've heard brought up a couple times. So the difficulty is functionally similar to the base game, in a way that makes a lot more sense. So for example, one thing that happened recently while I was playing the vanilla game. I had a Swordmaster, had a Terror Knight, I was trying to get both of them to function properly. both of them did as much damage as a guy with a knife, just like some random rando over there with a knife. Just comes in and, you know, overpowers both of them. They've both been level grinding a fair bit, they've been collecting cards, they've been getting their crafted items, and this rando with a knife is outdoing their much larger weapons. So instead, the difficulty kind of matches the story a lot better. For example, you see a lot of leaders showing up with Terror Knights and that kind of thing, and in base game, you know, flat out made of tissue paper. So, you know, you could just roll right through that. In this one, however, you know, their defense has gotten a lot better, offensive options are a lot better, all your heavy weapons are a lot better against armor, all your light weapons are a lot better against squishies, tend to bounce off armor a fair bit more. So when you see somebody that's, you know, going sword and board, you know that they're trying to, you know, they're going to be evasive, they're focusing on their defense. They're not going to be able to hit a guy in armor as well as, say, a guy with a two-hander or a, you know, heavy warhammer or a big battle axe or something like that. So, you know, you can essentially look at builds and kind of see how people will fight. So personally, I like having a mix of heavy spears and some light pikemen as kind of a front line. Or, you know, you have, as rakes like to call them, can openers. So, like, right here, you know, sword masters with a heavy two-hander, which they can use now. They can use Western weapons now. So, the difficulty, I would say, is about the same as it is in base game, if you're playing on an Iron Man run. So, like, for example, a unit goes down, you can't revive them on the spot. You actually can't revive them unless you sacrifice another unit to revive them. The revival mechanics have changed as such as you have only a couple ways to actually bring somebody back on their feet. You got Salvation Gems, which are your upgraded life gems. The unit using it sacrifices themselves to bring them back up. What used to be Rune Fencers, which are now Spellblades. I think I have Denim here as one. Actually, no, I have them as a Lord, but they have that ability innately. It's just called Relay. Actually, why don't we just go ahead and swap him over to that to kind of show that off. So I don't actually know who I have as a Spellblade in this one. This is just kind of a save I put together to kind of look at it, but... So we have that right here. So they essentially sacrifice themselves to bring somebody back. Never put that on Denim, because if Denim goes away, you basically get a game over. It's kind of a weird story as far as that goes. Now, you also have Angel Knights, which are able to... I believe they're the only class that can flat-out revive, actually. Let's take a look here. I believe it was Requiem... Okay, no, that's the Undead one. Just want to check which one of these it is. He might not actually have the level to do it, or that might have gone away. Or that might have actually moved over to... what's-his-face? Do I even have, Yeah, here he is. I think Hamilton might be the one that has it then. Oh, no, wait, he just has Relay now, so... No, scratch that. There is no full-on revival ability, to my knowledge. I still believe it's somewhere out there. But, you know, I'm sure Mr. Rakes will correct me if I'm wrong. So another thing that gets asked a lot is this for the SNES or the PSP version. This is for the PSP one. You know, the SNES version, if you understand Japanese, has Chronicle Valeria. The PSP one has One Vision. They're entirely different mods accomplishing entirely different things and are both crazy impressive in their own right, but, you know, that's its own thing. So, another question that gets well, I will repeat myself repeatedly, that gets asked a lot is, you know, this is my first time. Can I still play the mod? And at this point, it's actually complete enough to the point where, personally, if you liked Knight of Lotus, I would say you would probably love the mod a lot more than the base game. If you're just coming from an MMO background or something like that, you might like the base game a lot more. It's really just... One Vision tends to follow strategic logic a lot more, base game tends to follow RPG logic a lot more. So, you know, pick your flavor, they're both out there. You know, both are pretty cheap at this point, so you're probably paying the $20 for the game anyway if you don't already have it. Another question is, why does healing heal twice? So, I should probably show this off here in a quick little Tynmouth fight. But healing does heal twice now. Essentially, it has the base healing that it's always done, and then it has a secondary healing, kind of a scaling of sorts. So, we'll just go back and forth a bit until it finally decides to trigger it. Or screw it, we'll just go to Farampa instead of waiting for a rando. Let's put you here. Actually, yeah, let's put Donalto, let's put Diligent, and let's put Elrig, who looks awesome now, by the way. This is actually one note that I haven't seen brought up as much. Same goes for Lance. Whoa, got some crazy lag all of a sudden. You got Rudlam here looking like a Templar. You got Chamos, you know, looking like Thug Knight or Thug Wizard over here. Deneb's a little bit darker. You got what's it? Yuria's in her better costume. This is basically her enemy sprite, and honestly, it looks cooler. So there's that. You know, Tammuz, he's just a random knight in neutral. He became like a flying. He's the only Birdman that can become a knight. You got what's it? You got Sarah with a unique sprite. You got a few others that are different. Personally, Elrig's one of my favorites. He's supposed to be a pirate captain. Look at this bastard. He's a total pirate captain right now. Originally, you just got a generic cleric, and it's like, who's this guy? How is he a pirate captain? So this is what he used to look like. This is what he looks like now. Perfect. Friggin' beautiful right there. Felicia has her own thing. She looks like, what's her face? I can't remember her face. I don't remember her name. You know, that one girl that that heals up lands. You got Lyndall in an alternate thing, and you got Obda and Berta right here, who are actually colored for your convenience. So, there's all that. So, yeah, let's go ahead and show off this double healing thing right here. Fast forward a little bit, so I'm just going to immediately run away from this fight. So I'm just going to hop in and hop out as difficulty, well, what difficulty? As different stuff allows, so we're going to see a little bit of lag here. Actually, you know what? Fix that. And fix you, we have the technology, and the technology is Simulate Block Transfer Effect. So, for whatever reason, that actually slows down emulation. We may see some visual glitches out of that, but it's fine. So Felicia's going to be fine. Donalto here is going to go heal himself. So as you see, his healing is scaled up quite a bit, so got a 45 and got a 71 out of that. So your base healing scales a little bit. The secondary healing is kind of like an extra bonus on top of that. And overall, between the two of them, you end up scaling up to what you probably would have done in the original game. Now next, how do I revolve, how do I revive Aurelius, or the general mechanics of revival, which I've already covered just a minute ago. But yeah, in neutral, it's a little bit of a thing to revive Aurelius, because if you look through your items... Oops. Sure. Do that. If you look through your items, you actually should... down here. Why do I not have them on this file? Ah, fail, fail, fail. Alright. Let's go ahead and withdraw. Load up another file real quick here, just to show what's going on. Up the Adventures of Pants over here. No, don't need to go to the shop. The items. What am I even doing here? Inventory. There we go. So if we go down here, we have the same. So lifelines and salvations. So lifelines are essentially the evacuation mechanic. If somebody goes down, their options are basically you can evacuate them, or they can bleed out. Or you can sacrifice a unit to bring them back if you have a salvation gem on you. Either way, you're not getting away scot-free from that loss. So, lifeline gems will simply evacuate them. This prevents them from taking an injury or a death, and will get them off the battlefield. As Rakes put it, presumably they're being sent off to a nearby medical tent or something like that. Okay, so I think that basically covers the revival mechanics. So you can either evacuate or you can revive somebody. The only reason Aurelius comes up on neutral there is specifically on neutral. There's a bit of a bug with how the game handles it. Rakes is currently working on it, as I understand. But if you revive her, everything's fine. She triggers her dialogue. Everything's all good to go. If you evacuate her, she does not trigger her dialogue, and then you aren't able to continue on with the Cressida side quest. Again, it's a very specific case out of hundreds of fights. You know, that's the one that has a weird bug to it. Okay. Next up, question of what happened to Donalto's sprite. This comes up a fair bit on the very first time you fight with him. When he goes through his exorcism cutscene, he doesn't quite show up. This is just due to the fact that he has a new sprite, he has a new look to him. You know, he kind of looks like a disheveled old man now instead of... I don't know, I think his original version looked cool, but you kind of expected him to pull out handguns at some point. Like, he looked like the crazy, you know, super metal priest, but, you know, he always acted like kind of a disheveled old man. He's all tired of the war and everything. He's not looking all super cool. It actually kind of reminded me of this one priest that used to be in my Catholic school growing up. Turned out to be a pedophile. Anyway, I'm not even kidding. That literally happened. So it doesn't load up normally. Point being, he has a new one. The game does not have, as I understand, it doesn't have the IDs in place to actually load it up. Essentially, if you load, like let's say you're playing an older file, you go and start a new game, then he'll load up properly because the game actually knows to have him loaded. So it just doesn't know to have him there yet. Again, it's just one cutscene, it doesn't really matter, you just see a little shadow, and then he's immediately fine a few seconds later, so that's kind of a moot point right there. Next up, missable items. So a few people have asked what items can be missed over the course of a playthrough. At this point, you know, the missable items aren't really a thing. You get all of your books, you get all of your necessary items. Like, for example, there was one very annoying thing that I happened to run into, let's see. I think it was this very top save file, if I remember correctly. Yeah, I may have done quite a lot of runs of this game, but okay. So this party right here, right? So I go over here. I wound up in this weird situation. This is base game, by the way. This is before the mod. Now, looking at this list, granted, some stuff has changed in name because the mod's loaded up. Notice how you don't see Codex of Gems? So, you need that in order to make pretty much all the jewelry. So, I basically got completely screwed on that run because I was stuck in a position where I either had to go back and redo the entire thing, or just go through the entire storyline to go pick up the friggin' Codex of Gems again, or just accept the fact that I accidentally critted a guy off the map and that deleted the leader, which meant that I didn't get the drop of that particular crafting book. So, according to Rakes, the only missable item at this point is, let's see, it was one bow in particular, which he's adding to the drop table, but you should have access to all drops and all available things at any given time right now, which I assume also applies to the Fortress drops. If you're unaware, with the Fortress drops you get one roll for each time that you go through the first time, but then when you fight that same boss the second time, you have a different set of drops for whatever reason. Previously this meant that certain accessories and certain crafting books specifically were unobtainable unless you went back, just basically went back in time, you redid all of those annoying side quests for the fortresses. So it was a bit of a chore. Again, it's questionable why they did it that way. Like, I know in this particular save file, I was kind of screwed out of getting the Shieldcraft book. So, either way, never really felt like going back and getting it, but at this point, as I understand, all of those should drop. There's actually a patch coming out at some point, once he's finished getting to that point, since it has to be mentioned he's doing this entire thing with a hex editor, so every little change requires him going and individually, like, changing tiny bits of data all over the friggin' place. It's a wonder how the hell he pulled this off. Like, even as it is, like, it's a downright friggin' miracle. Like, hands down the most impressive thing I've seen as far as mods are concerned, and that's including a lot of really, like, huge scale stuff. Like, I've been looking at different mods of New Vegas and Morrowind and Skyrim and whatever for years, and even I've never been as impressed as I am with this mod. But anyway, point being, at some point there will be a guaranteed drop thing for a lot of other items. For example, like let's say you get the 4 Wind God weapons. For those unaware, you basically need that for getting the Fire Crest, which is what Cashaway here has. Which is basically the best accessory in the game. Reduces your weight by 10 and gives you all of your stats. In order to get that thing, you needed 4 very rare drops from 4 very random enemies all over the frickin' game in some of the worst dungeons that you're gonna find, in very specific locations that if you don't get the drop that time, you know, enjoy doing 70 more fights to get back to that place. Again, weird MMO-isms, but at any rate, those will all be guaranteed in a later patch, but at this point, there are no missable items. So, how finished is the mod? It's finished enough that honestly, every time I see somebody going into the game for the first time, I easily recommend it, because it gives a far better first impression and lasting impression, I feel, than the base game does. Next up, how annoying are guest battles, and can I trust units to not go suicide themselves? Which you absolutely can. At this point, guest battles are to the point where, you know, I can probably even show this right here. Let's pull a World Tarot. Let's go way back here. Way down to Chapter 1. Let's see here. Crysero, and we got Tynemouth, so let's go to this one right here. Gee, let's see. It's the one I think it is. No, it isn't. That's that one. Or is it? Yeah, yeah, the rhyme fight here. The Archaeopolis. So, we're going to go through Golborza real quick, just so I can show you a few of the changes here. So we got 2 of the strongest members of the team right here just hanging out. Actually, one thing I'd like to point out right here. This fight will scale up to level 50. As you can see, we have 36, 49 over here, 39. There's a very, 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 very wide range of levels going on. And you know what? That's perfectly fine. This fight is completely... any of them, really, are completely winnable by units that are drastically underleveled. So, your levels matter a lot less, but the skills that those individual units have, those will end up mattering a lot more. You know, how experienced they are, how much work you've put into those particular units. At the same time, I should probably mention that all fights do scale, or what am I saying here? All experience for all of your skills is actually about 7 to 10 times faster, so all of your skills are more likely to actually level up in a reasonable amount of time. And I apologize for the weird graphical situation. This is just due to simulate block transfer effects. I can turn that back on, but we'll just get that stuttering going again. It's mostly a stream thing, but whatever. So we'll deal with that. Just shoot some stuff out here. I should mention a couple of these units are going to be a little bit stronger than they should be in the mod. This is due to the fact that I had a save file that I already had a couple of runs into in base game, so even though I was tending not to pick up any cards, their base stats are still going to be a little bit higher. Let's see, Felicia's one of them. You're probably not going to notice too big of a difference, but let's see, Felicia's one of them, Canopus is one of them. So those 2 are going to be a little bit stronger than they normally would be. Most of the rest had died at some point, so they ended up coming back as different stuff, so don't worry there. But okay, so guests in general, you can rely on them to keep themselves alive. What I'm hoping to show here is the Sistina fight, just because, actually come to think of it, this is a bad example because it's just going to be my version of her, which is crazy overpowered. Okay. When you get in, when you get to this fight, when you originally get to the fight in base game, you had a problem where Sistina would constantly run out and get herself killed. She just had a spear, basic armor, and everything else was underleveled in most cases, and she would just immediately get herself dead. So with the mod, she comes with a one-handed spear and shield right off the bat. So already she's got a lot more defense, she's got a lot more evasion. Basic armor comes with a vest usually, which means once again she's going to have more evasion, pretty decent defense. By and large, the dragon and the fencer that are nearby them, they're usually the ones that end up doing her in. it's not going to end up happening. By the way, Cash was a friggin' beast. A few people were wondering whether certain units that they really liked ended up getting nerfed. So Cash was a beast, and, well, as you can see right here, Ozma's a beast. By the way, any units that are staring at her, she can basically stare at them and turn them into a rock. That guy's facing the wrong direction. Actually, that would have been a kill if she hadn't gotten a crit on that first one. Anyhow, moving on. So, by and large, she's going to be a lot better at keeping herself alive. You easily have an extra 3 or 4 turns to get to her to keep her healed up, if you even have to at all. In the second fight, another one that comes up sometimes, she has a tendency to charge in on the flank when you're saving her in that port town later. I forget what the name of the port right now. But when you go back to try and help her, she, again, base game, even after you ended up saving her the first time, she had a tendency to get herself dead there. In this one, same thing. Her equipment is set up for evasion. She has a very easy time keeping herself alive. By the way, another cool thing that Canopus can do now, and all Vartans really, they get multiple buffs with their different moves, and it's all nice and nifty. So like he gets renewal and sidestep, he gets movement +2 and resilient. So once you get all his buffs going, he can be a really, really, really good skirmisher. But don't expect him to do the crazy damage that he used to do. So there's that. So another one that comes up: chokers and earrings. Again, kind of a weirdly specific one for people that have made it all the way to endgame. Basically, before, chokers were considered always better than earrings, just due to the fact that they scaled for elemental stuff. Elemental stuff had a tendency to just be the absolute king of endgame. So that's somewhat the case. Well, okay, no. It's not exactly the case. So, the way that it's changed now, when it comes to chokers, they're better for your hybrids and basically anybody that's going to be doing casting stuff. While they do affect equipment, the earrings have a tendency to affect the actual weapons a lot stronger now. Their effects are a lot more noticeable. So, for example, right here, my strongest hitter is Sistina with a Reaver earring. So any of your weapon users are going to be better with earrings. Any of your hybrids or casters are going to be better off using their other equipment. Man, Vice is so friggin' strong right now. You may notice in general some of these units that used to be downright delete buttons, Vice especially. I mean, comparing to my base game right now, my base game version of Vice easily does like 2 to 3 times that damage, and he's about half the level, so there's that. I mean, his base game damage was an absolute joke. But, by the way, if you're wondering what's with all the damage ticks here, I should probably mention cursed weapons while we're on this little thing. They actually do that 0 HP thing, which is essentially a double hit. But Vice, you know, he's much more defensive of a unit. He's far better in terms of just he's still kind of like a super ninja, but he's got a lot more overall utility. He's got access to longbows. He's got his whole double dagger thing if you want to do that. I'll show off more of his skills in a little bit. Either way, you're not going to be seeing as much of that whole, you know, I've got one unit and they're going to go in and they're going to just curb stomp everything over there. And now, all of your units are people. Everyone is a person. Everyone's got, you know, some competence to them. All of your randos that you're fighting, they're still going to have a fair bit of competence to them. You know, they're just going to, in general, as Rakes put it several times, everyone's better at their job. So you won't have like a fencer that's like, oh, check it out, I'm gonna do all these spells here for 1 damage, and then he's just gonna sit there with a nice smug look on his face as he did a 1, you know. So no, your hybrids are still gonna be capable of doing damage now. And generally, everyone's still gonna be better at doing their different things, but hybrids can actually function as hybrids. You don't have to build them towards one thing or another. By the way, there's double damage guns as well. Well, I guess not technically double damage. At one point they were double damage, and it was a little bit hilarious, because you could do like 1500 damage if you used them right. So that's been nerfed, but oh man, I wish it hadn't been. That was such an amazing time when that was possible. I think the highest I got it was literally like 1,497 off of a single shot from a pistol. Anyhow, moving on. So, what else here? Yes, battles, chokes, and that. How has armor changed? Okay, so armor is very, very different from base game. So the way armor worked in base game, you had, you're just rising tiers the whole time. The type of armor didn't really matter. It was just kind of better. They had some slight differences that basically never mattered. Like, you had Baldur that gave you better stuff at magic. Okay, good. That's fine for a little bit, and then you notice pretty early on, it's like, okay, this tiny bonus isn't enough to keep you from updating to the next thing. You're just losing out on the bonus and feeling kind of bummed out about that. So, like, especially, I like that little phase in base game where there's, like, just Terror Knights that are around that are able to actually use their abilities because they have full Baldur, but then they're not able to after a while. So then suddenly it's no longer viable even at the +1 stage. So, okay, so your different types of armor, right? So if you look here, you've got full armor, you've got vests, you've got armored vests. Like, vests, for example, are going to be your basic light armor, so your leather that you start off with, which, historically dubious, but whatever. It wasn't ideal, let's just say. It wasn't exactly that common. It's not that it didn't exist, it's just it wasn't that great compared to other stuff. Anyway, so, like, for example, leather is considered a light vest. You get your Damask vests, you get your Brigandines, you get your Elemental vests. Those are just going to be there for evasion. So this kind of stuff, just anything that looks like a vest. So that's going to give you moderate defense, it's going to give you a pretty good chance of evading stuff coming your way. It's like a good general purpose thing. And then you've got heavy armors, which, by the way, why the hell do I not have armor on you? Interesting. So you've got full plate. You start off with chain, it moves on to full plate, but those are just your heavy ones. So you get your health bonuses, you get better defensive bonuses, you get a VIT bonus. Stuff works out pretty well. Helmets will generally follow that same trend as just being full armor. You've got different types of robes and stuff like that. So, some are evasion, some are caster-type robes. All of these are just in different categories. So, like, gloves, you'll have ones that are meant for heavy hitting. That'll end up giving you, let's say, a strength bonus and a health bonus. You got ones that are meant for ranged units, like right here. You see 30 luck, you've got some dex bonus, you've got your mild defense bonus. So these ones are meant to just increase your crit rate. You've got other ones that are casting gloves, and let's see if I have any available. Like, these would be the defensive ones, these would be the defensive ones, for example. Yeah, like right here. You get some of the other bonuses, but they end up giving you int and stuff like that as well. But I believe Luminants are a little bit different. So, Mage's Gloves, specific, that's kind of their role. Point being, everything has got categories, and generally you'll be able to just take a look at somebody and, like, let's take a look at this guy, right? So, I see that he's got a two-handed axe, so he's going to be relatively slowish. That thing's pretty heavy. Looks like he's got, he's got a unique variant, so you don't have to worry about whether it's regular or whatever else, but it is bearded. As you can see, when it says RT increased, that basically means when he hits somebody with it, their next turn is going to be delayed. So, by the way, some stuff like that will be updated over time with proper text. There's actually a really cool thing that he's working on for version 90A, which is when you go over to this right here, it'll essentially say what the weapon scales with, and its weight and class type and things like that. So that should be very useful for anybody looking at that down the line. So looking at his other equipment, normally Berserkers would suffer as far as accuracy a little bit, but he's got an Alacrity ring to make up for that. He's got a vest, so he's going to have some pretty decent evasion, and he's got a heavy helmet, so he's going to have a little bit of extra health and defense and everything else on him. So he's pretty well. He's got some pretty okay all-around protection. He doesn't have anything protecting him from casters, though. So, for example, Caffeine here would be able to hit him pretty hard with this. He's not a very good caster, but he does have that, and it's enough to give him a pretty decent punch right there. Moving on from there. Let's see, next on here. So, is armor RT scaling still confusing? Again, this is a thing that's probably come up if you've gone a pretty long distance in base game. So, what they mean by RT scaling, so every piece of equipment that you have if I can go to their stuff right here. Let's use Leonard as an example, because he's got some pretty harsh stuff. So, okay, every item that you use has a weight and an RT. So the RT plus is essentially if you use that item, essentially the cost that it's going to add to your RT score. So your RT is over here. Essentially, whenever it reaches 0, you take your turn. Every action that you take, so every amount of tiles that you move, it'll end up giving you that much more. Each class has a different movement speed per tile, so I think like rogues were 4, I think, knights are like 6. But each tile adds a little bit to that. The weight of your equipment adds to that as well, and your recovery time plus is if you use that item, you get that much extra until your next turn. So like this one's a 12, however for a third of that, you can smack something with a shield, and shields actually do pretty okay damage now. So you know, shield bashing, legitimately a good strategy for pushing through front lines and stuff like that. Absolutely friggin' love it. But it's actually linear now, so if you get somebody in light armor, throughout the course of the game, every time that you upgrade their light armor to something else, they will still be in that same category. Their speed won't be constantly changing. You don't have to worry about a unit suddenly becoming really slow because you upgraded from a Brigandine to basically an Elemental Brigandine, and suddenly they're all slower. And I guess what they were going with the whole scaling RT up and up and up thing is, you know, maybe if you didn't upgrade you'd get a speed bonus, but it was never worth it. Like, speed doesn't mean jack if you can't actually hurt anything. That's the problem. So, mind in the right place, but I feel like One Vision corrected that and got it to where it needs to go. So another question is, why does, you know, X kill move no longer do some preposterous amount of damage? And that's mostly because of how scaling was changed. A lot of them got changed over to accuracy and have been given a different debuff. It's like looking at these right here. Like Ruination used to be just scales damage, and actually no wait, I think that one might have been accuracy. Either way, it was a pretty nothing move. You just ran up and poked something slightly harder. Whereas right now it's given a 2-tile range and it silences, so it's really good for shutting down healers. Or Wind Scythe, which used to get breached and, you know, slightly more ranged. There's no reason you would ever not use Wind Scythe over Ruination unless the damage type mattered really. Whereas now it ends up doing Wither, like it says right there. So it lowers their maximum HP, so if you have a tank unit you can't get down, they keep getting healed. Use that, it'll lower their base health, so they'll be much easier to deal with. Like Giga Tempest here, it's still kind of a AoE move. You got Charybdis, that's a similar thing, and also affects their speed. So, again, everything is just given a different debuff. They're no longer the run-up and delete button. They're all going to be situational stuff that does different things based on what you need them to do. So, like, Sonic Blade here, it essentially it shackles something. Or actually, no, wait, Sonic Blade is, wait, what was that? Reconnecting. And still attempting to reconnect. Might be having an internet issue. Still reconnecting. Alright. Good to know. Okay, are we back? Looks like we're back. Okay. Now it appears the emulator has gone silent for whatever reason. Okay, there we go. Seems like we're back. So, okay, where were we? Oh yeah, so, kill moves, right? So, their whole thing now is to be more of a situational tide changer than an instant delete button. So yeah, like right here, looking at the two-hander stuff, so you got one here that stuns. You got one here that shackles, you got one here that resets RT. So for example, you've got two units right next to each other. This one doesn't do the most damage really, but you know, you might end up slowing them down a fair bit. You got one right here that is essentially just an AoE move. And this one actually does scale with TP, so this is going to be your big damager. What's this? Oh. Twitch telling me to turn my dashboard back on. Okay, fine. By the way, if you have any questions at any point, just let me know. So yeah, all of them are going to have different stuff. All of them are going to be situational, and there aren't going to be any instant delete buttons, except for stuff like axes. And again, those will maybe do 3/4 of something's health and disable them, but you're not really going to see, you know, some massive just chunk of friggin' insta-kill damage, so you aren't going to end up seeing that kind of stuff. Now, okay, moving on to the next one. Okay, in the OV patch notes, talk about weapon attack versus damage bonus. Guessing attack power is attack stat of the weapon, while damage bonus is the crushing, piercing, slashing type bonuses. How does damage calculation work in regards to those? When would you want higher attack power than damage bonus and vice versa? Okay. So, basically what this refers to is okay, let me point these out right here. So, this is your attack bonus. This essentially is your thing that says, okay, this is how much it's attacking with. The defending number is how much they're defending with. I will point out, these numbers right here are inaccurate, but the way to think of it is, this is your armor piercing, and this is your extra damage on top of whatever you get there. So for example, say you've got a big bonus right here, right? Say you just barely pierce their armor, right? Instead of doing just a little bit of damage, you know, you're going to end up doing a lot of your bonus damage. Say like 1 damage gets through here, you end up having your extra points of damage here. So, for example, stuff like axes will have a much easier... hang on, I think this is the way you did it. Let me double check on axes versus hammers. So, hammers are going to have a much higher attack bonus, so they're going to have a much easier time getting through armor. But once they get through, they're going to have less additional bonus, except in some cases against certain things. These just mean it'll do a little bit of... do 40% extra against dragons. Whereas, say, something like this has a harder time compared to that hammer getting through armor. This is a one-handed variant, by the way. But it will have extra damage based off that damage bonus once it gets to the other side. So, hopefully that explains that a little bit. I just think of it as armor piercing and bonus damage. So, okay, so on a similar note, the patch notes talk about some weapons being dex weapons. I assume this means weapons that scale on dex instead of strength in some way. How's that work? And is there any indication in-game if a weapon is a dex weapon or not? And I assume strength is the only alternative, or do I just have to remember what type is what? So, originally there were actually a lot of different ways that stuff scaled all over the place, but it wasn't always clear. Like, for example, as I understand, there was some weird scaling formula with the Griffin's stunning hook ability, except because of the way it scaled somehow, I guess it just never stunned, practically. So, the way scaling works right now is just either strength or dex or a mix of both. The way that he described it was either light or heavy scaling on each thing, and essentially going strength, dex, quality, and going in light and heavy in different amounts. So he's actually going to include how much that scales, as I understand, and just what type of weapons are there in this kind of thing right here. So if you hit select, you go to axes. Right now it just says axes and tells you what they are. That essentially will, in the next update, it will have that as just kind of a mention of, okay, like, look, it's an axe, it scales mostly off strength. You know, two-hander, strength, maybe a little bit of dex in that. You've got, you know, swords probably going mostly off dex. Spears going mostly dex, but some strength kind of thing. So it's funny because that's actually what used to cause bows to be so overpowered. I think I mentioned that earlier. But essentially, they used to get maximum scaling, plus you got your background damage. They got a whole bunch of extra stuff. In terms of slashing, piercing, and whatever else, this is just bonus damage. If you're thinking, you know, piercing defense, piercing armor, or piercing damage and piercing defense are going to counteract each other, they're just a flat bonus that happens to correspond to that type of thing. It's mostly flavor, but just think of it as just a bonus. That's the kind of extra thing you get. Then these are racial bonuses, and these are percentage-based. So your elements doesn't really say it. You know, it scales off of ice, for example. This right here tells you this is 20% better against golems. And I don't know if it's I believe it's like 4% extra off of pierce damage. So I could be incorrect on that, but I believe these are all percentage-based instead of being a hard number. So there's that. Again, I assume Mr. Rakes will correct me if I'm wrong here. Again, there's a lot to remember about this thing, but I believe that's how it goes. What skills affect healing power? This question mainly came up in regards to Augment Light and Anatomy. I did a Google search, and it seems like in the base game they were good healing, but really small, maybe 2 to 3 HP. With one vision changes, do the skills have more of an effect? So they kind of do. You basically get your secondary scaling thing that goes up a fair bit anyway. As far as Anatomy and Augment whatever, it's still going to be the same, like 2 to 5 bonus maybe, like per thing. It's not really going to be anything major. It's noticeable, but it's not going to be the end of the world for healing. Unfortunately, yeah, healing is one of those things that they implemented kind of strangely, but you will see your overall healing go up over time pretty significantly, point where you can expect healers consistently, all the way up to level 50, they will be able to go and, say, put on a Mother's Blessing and instantly heal somebody. So that is something that scales up pretty well, but I wouldn't... Augment Light and Anatomy, they're just going to be very tiny bonuses still. That's just something that's built into the game. For a lot of those really built-in things, it's gonna... that'll change down the line. Once he starts going with whatever this MIPS program is, apparently it allows for altering some of the more in-depth stuff. But right now he's doing it all with a hex editor, so some things can't be changed, and that is one of those things. So that'll change down the line. So since I've only played the PSX one before, I'm not familiar with the crafting system. I know it's been vastly simplified in OV. I'm getting a lot of bronze and copper uberiths, and I have some war bonds, I believe, as well. And they're all under the crafting tab, or something similar, I think. Game isn't in front of me right now. Do I just sell all of these for goth, or will there be a use when crafting opens up? Did the Law Path really need that much love in the remake? That'll be the last question. But, any dangways, as far as crafting goes, we can go take a look at that right now. So that's right over here. So obviously crafting is going to be just based entirely off of how many books you've picked up. This is, I believe, all but one of the books in the game. So, base game, actually let's take one of these as an example, because I'm really familiar and somewhat salty about this one in particular. So, base game crafting, right? Here's how it went. Essentially, you had raw metal, and then you had that raw metal turned into a specific type of ore, and then you had to melt down that ore into bars, and then you had to get a bunch of those bars, and then you had a set % chance to make a thing. So like, for example, right here, this used to be the Bastard Sword, right? So it used more or less the same ingredients. I believe it was 2 steel ingots, 1 iron ingot, and a strength card. So if you didn't get a strength card, screw you. You random drop, you need to go get that random drop. So, oh well. Anyway, so you would essentially go to your raw ores. You'd probably buy 99 of them because you were going to need a crap ton of those suckers. You would go make 3 iron ores to make your iron ingot. You would then go make, let's see what it was. You needed 2 steel bars. You needed 6 per bar, so you needed another 12. So you'd go through the crafting window 15 times in order to make those. Then you'd make 4 graphite. Then essentially you'd go and roll those and hope that, you know, steel didn't screw you over. I think it had like a 99% chance. I have seen that fail before and I was pissed. Anyway, so you go make all those, you got all those, you got your strength card, and then you got like a 67% chance that the item will just explode on you as soon as you craft it. So naturally everyone save scummed it. It was annoying, like straight up annoying with nothing else to say about it. So the way that it was fixed in this, here's all you need to do, right? Go down here. Like, we saw the weapon that I wanted to make, so let's say we want to make this Keanu, well, that's kind of an advanced weapon, whatever. Let's say we want to make this line breaker, right? So we see we need 1 steel, we need 1 iron, and we need an Espadon. This should also be mentioned, that that Espadon right there, that will be good right out of the bat. When you buy it, it'll actually be a weapon. You will be able to reasonably use it. You won't have to craft an upgrade in order for it to not be garbage. So, if I sound a little bit iffy on that, it's because yesterday I was going and I was trying to craft a particular spear. That thing failed 7 times in a row on a run that I specifically dedicated myself to just completely do Iron Man, never reloading the thing, and it just kept failing over and over and over. It's like, man, I'm really tired of making boulder ingots because those things take forever. So, anyway. So we go down here to ores. You have inferior ore, you have refined ore, and you have superior ore, or purified ore, sorry. This is the only step you need to make an ingot. So, I already have iron, I would just make one of these. These are all 100% chance. So, what this accomplishes, I go up here, I can just go and quickly slap this together. What is it? So right here, I still need to buy an Espadon, so I go here. This thing's already good. This is the base variant. It gives us a small accuracy bonus. It's got a pretty decent amount of armor penetration, pretty decent amount of extra damage. Good overall weapon. So I go down here, go to this one, and make one of these. So like it says, this is an unwieldy version because the all the crafting items, with late game exceptions being made there, are essentially going to be entirely side grades. They're going to be for very specific situations. So like right here, I made one that has a severe penalty to accuracy, but a lot more damage than the other one did. It's like 20 more damage, I think, is what it added right there, and gave about 5% extra bonus damage on top of that. So, you know, pretty hefty extra damage. You'd probably want to use it on, say, a soldier or a Terror Knight that had 100% hit chance ability. And for them it would be really solid. For a lot of other units, especially like a Swordmaster or something like that, they can't afford to miss a hit, so it wouldn't be terribly great for them. Now, last thing here, you know, I hope that clarified crafting for you. Did the Law Path really need that much more love in the remake? The Law Path gets a lot of love. You can basically get all the sisters, you can get the most characters, and you pretty much get the most complete story going through Law. Personally, I love Neutral. I just figure it's the best story. Not to mention, I think what happens to Hector is just, if you've gone through the other routes, is just nuts. I think it's just poetic what happens to that guy. Anyway, so I don't want to spoil anything, but yeah, no, the Law route is definitely the last one you want to go with whenever you're making a save file. For those unfamiliar, basically everything that you do throughout your story carries over into Coda. That is considered, it's like the post-game, it's the state of your game, as it were. Law route is the one that ends up giving you the most available options at that point, but you can go back in time and change stuff and all that sort of thing. But at any rate, you know, I hope this was helpful for some. I will continue doing these at some point probably, and yeah, if there's any further questions, go ahead and ask. So thank you for stopping by or watching this thing, and have a good one.